This is the Voices of Herriman podcast, the podcast that amplifies the voices of our community. Nestled here in the heart of Herriman, where everyone has a story. Whether you're a Herriman native, a newcomer, or an admirer from afar, I got you on this adventure. Welcome to the Voices of Herriman. All right, guys, welcome back into Voices of Herriman. We're down here at the belly of redemption, and I've got a very special guest today. I have got award-winning #1 author Rob Eastman here, author of Warrior in the Garden.
Yep.
Rob, we are so excited to have you on here, my friend.
I'm grateful to be here. I appreciate you reaching out and getting the connection.
Dude, and now you are a Herriman guy.
Yeah. It's first time in 45 years I've ever lived out of the county I lived in. And so it's been a good adjustment.
Well, we are so glad to have you. Tell us a little about growing up. What was Rob like growing up?
Oh, man, it depends on who you ask. But if you ask my mom, she said I chewed the umbilical cord myself and then ran out of the operating room. I think growing up, I grew up in Bountiful and, little redhead, and you don't really notice too much until you get into school. And that's when everything started for me. It's like, got to sit still for more than 5 seconds. So my teacher was now as an adult was awful. And that's really where I first started getting bullied, was my teacher, and couldn't sit still. So she'd make fun of me in front of the other kids. Then that would transition out to recess, and it just kind of compiled from there. But I think growing up, I have 3 older sisters and a younger brother, and my dad was a car dealer and mom was a stay-at-home mom, and felt pretty loved, and it felt good till getting into school and not being able to sit still, not being able to focus. Going to elementary school in the 80s, it was a different time. Rulers and lava soap bars in your mouth.
Yeah.
So, but I was really, the only thing that really kept me sane back then was when I was playing sports. And I played soccer from a very young age, basketball, just kind of grew up doing stuff like that. But very, very early on, as a little kid, all you want to do is fit in. And teacher doesn't like me. Kids are making fun of me. And, we don't have all the mental health stuff that we do today. So it's like, hey, what's wrong with me? What do I need to do to be better? So that's kind of when I call it wearing masks. It's like I just started developing these alter egos, if you will, of how do I fit in with this group? What do I need to do to fit in with this group? And pretty much daily, it was either verbal or physical abuse on the playground. And I grew up LDS, and I'm getting ready to get baptized, and telling me that my life's going to change when I do this. And I just remember in my head, it was like, I'm going to be popular. I'm going to be good at math. I'm going to be able to sit still, all of these things. So I was so excited, get baptized and go back to school on Monday, and nothing had changed. And in an 8-year-old mind, that was like the first time I started waging war with God or not believing the adults in my life. And that's not a very good place for a young kid to be. And it was that later that year, goofing off in class, and the teacher says, "Robbie, come up here and take your medicine. Why can't you sit still like everybody else?" And the whole class laughed. And so now I'm like, well, if they're laughing, they must not have to take medication. So I stopped taking my medication. There was just so many things thrown in so early that I didn't have the skills necessary for. Yeah. So the following year, that's when I first started thinking about not being here. We didn't have all the social media. I didn't know that you could actually kill yourself. But I knew I didn't want to be around. It seemed like nobody wanted me around. I was always in trouble. So at that point, everybody gets if you hate your job, you get anxiety on Sunday night. But it's like every Sunday night, I'm like, man, I put on my armor. I'm going to war. And I was so sick of people. I knew all the pain came from school, kids at school, teachers, that I didn't care how big they were. I was just going to start fighting back. And that really just changed. My moods were up and down, a lot of anger stored inside. So I basically went around and protected the kids that were getting bullied. And unfortunately that kind of turned me into a bully and became what I hated most. And whatever energy or anger or whatever I got at school, then I would go home and take it out on the people I love, my little brother, another guy that lives out here. You know, I've made my peace with that and them, but it's like, I don't know how I could have developed those things at such a young age, you know, not feeling a part of something, not feeling worthy. You know, we talked about shame before the show and, you know, getting in trouble at church and, you know, all these different things. I just didn't feel like I had anywhere to go. And, you know, I would wear my parents out. I'd wear my friends out. And ultimately it came to a point moving forward. And I won't get into too much of the stories, and we can talk about the book, but it got to a place where I was using, you know, I'm in the church, so we promised not to drink, smoke, or do drugs. So I used girls, you know, dating in junior high. It's like that cup with a hole in the bottom where it's just got a slow leak. And if somebody's not feeling it, I'm empty pretty quick. I didn't have that self-love. I didn't appreciate the person looking back in the mirror. And the bullying got so bad that between the summer between 6th grade and 7th grade, my ears stuck out. I had flaming red hair and a lot of people made fun of my ears. So my parents got my ears tucked thinking that I'll look better and kids won't pick on me anymore. But it's like in the psychology world, it's called conditioning. You know, I'd been conditioned from kindergarten to 6th grade to believe that I'm ugly, stupid, and unworthy. Doesn't matter what you dress up the outside. I was still rotting inside. So, you know, I was good at basketball, so I was a starting point guard and everybody loved me on the court, but it didn't transition into the hallway. So it's like that became an addiction. Like how can I be better? Soccer, same thing, scoring goals. But as soon as I'd leave the field and get back to school, I was at the bottom of the rung again. So I was constantly chasing this attention rather than understanding and learning the lessons I wish I would have had, which was self-love, understanding that your actions have natural consequences. And if it doesn't feel good, you should probably change that up. But it was so bad that my mom, we call it now, loving me to death. You know, she made things go away. You know, she would cuddle me and tickle me to sleep if I couldn't calm myself down. I wasn't, you know, we didn't have what we have now where we can sit in the pain and ask it why it's there. You know, that's one of the things I think that I do really well and that I work a lot with the youth on is I don't want to save you from that anxiety attack. I want to sit with you in it. And once you identify where the pain comes from, it's not going to come back like it did. You're going to understand it. You're going to know what sparks those events and you're going to change things. But if we sit and baby people along the way, then we release them to the wild at 18 or 19 or 20 and they don't have the skills necessary. And so for me, I got through and 9th grade was the first time I attempted suicide. And the cops came, picked me up and took me home and I had a gun. And that was the first time my dad took me out in the garage and smashed the gun up with a sledgehammer. And he's like, do you know why you don't have grandparents? And I was like, no, you know, we didn't have any around. I didn't really even know what that was. I knew I had some people on the street that were older and were like that. But he proceeded to tell me his dad drove his truck off of a bridge and his mother committed suicide a year later. And he kept looking at me and he's like, if you were to die, I don't know what I would do. And it was like, oh man, like suicide's not an option. And drugs and alcohol aren't an option. And I was just in this place between 9th and my sophomore year, you know, that fear, if you've been bullied, you get into the bigger school. Now it's like more kids, ones you don't know, bigger bullies. So again, I'm just preparing for war, like survival mode. Wasn't thinking about school. I was a terrible student. It's like, I'm already a terrible student. Then I'd have to go get tutored, made fun of for having tutors and try and get through this rat race when really I'm trying to manage not ending my life. And got into high school and it just got to a point where I couldn't handle it anymore and caved in one day and smoked weed for the first time. And all that pain went away for a minute. And I was like, oh my gosh, I should have done this a long time ago. But as anybody that's ever used drugs knows that one bowl turns into two bowls, turns into a bag, turns into that doesn't work anymore. And no matter how high I would get when I would come down, whatever I was running from was still there and even bigger, magnified. And the people I found myself being surrounded by. And at this point, I was friends with the religious kids, with the jocks, with the geeks. It was like I got so good at morphing into whatever anybody needed me to be. By the time I'd get home, I'd look in the mirror and I'd just see a fraud. It's like if anybody knew who I really was, they wouldn't love me. And that comes with lying, and it just doesn't feel good. So going through high school, I was a great soccer player, started varsity all 3 years, playing hockey, same thing. It's like that was my way out. And my dad was a school board president. And it was at a point where I would go to a stomp drunk. The cop would take my keys and he would give me a test at the end. And if I was okay, he'd let me go home. And it's like the politics, all these different things. If somebody just would have held me accountable from the start where the consequences weren't that big, then the next 15 years of my life could have been very different. So I got out, me and a couple friends. I had just gone to the UK playing soccer. And at this point, by the time I was out of high school, I was taking pills, smoking weed, drinking almost daily, one of each. I hadn't quite got to the full-blown alcoholic or drug addict yet, but I did not like to feel feelings, and no. I needed to morph out, and that was my way. And when it came to the real world, I was lost, growing up that way, feeling you mow the lawn, it takes an hour, you get $50, and then you go to get a job and they want to pay you $10 an hour. I'm like, I'm worth 50. They're like, your dad paid you that 50. And so it's like your ego's involved in all these different things I just couldn't manage. And me and my friends, we got in trouble. We ended up getting in a little altercation at this guy's house who ended up being a highway patrolman. And so all my soccer opportunities went away. And that's all I had left. And a few years later, there's a kid that I saved on the playground when I was in 6th grade. I was the smallest kid. He was tall, lanky, so he'd get made fun of for the way he looked. And I saved him on the playground, and we became like instant friends. And it was an amazing relationship because I could protect him at recess, and he was really smart, so he could do my homework. we had this amazing relationship, and that went on through. And he was the only person that I felt comfortable with talking about, being vulnerable with, talking about how I felt about myself. But the problem was neither one of us had the tools. We didn't have a solution. So it was just talk. And then we'd go and, go camping or whatever and get drunk and high five and go home. And 21st birthday, he threw me a party and it's kind of same thing, and got sick and woke up, didn't remember much, high five, gave him a hug, and we went our way. And I got a call about 10 days later from his mom asking if I'd seen him, and I hadn't. And then I got a call from the Provo Police Department and asked if he were to run away, where would he go? And I'm like, we spent a lot of time in the mountains because nobody was up there. We didn't have to be around people that were going to make fun of us or hurt us or whatever. And they ended up driving up Provo Canyon. They found his truck in one of those parking lots, and we searched for him for a few days and ultimately found his body on the side of the jogging path. And this was a kid we talked about everything. And I'm just racking my brain like, did he tell me he was going to do this? And I was too drunk to remember. I blew it off, and all these shoulda, coulda, wouldas. And ultimately after that, you can pretty much black out a decade of my life because I couldn't handle the shame, the fear, the pain, thinking that I was the cause of his death, and all of these things by 21 years old. I was really probably closer to 13 at 21, emotionally, because everybody was always coming in and saving me. There was no accountability. And I don't mean to say that bad, like my family didn't hold me accountable, but they loved me, they loved me too much. They didn't teach me the natural consequences of the real world. They didn't prepare me for what was coming down the pipeline. So getting out, getting fired from my dad's dealership and getting rehired. And, finally I wanted to be on my own, and I got a house with my cousin, and that just kind of took off from there, and drugs and alcohol and women. And it just, you can only maintain that for so long. And, that went through, start losing friends, overdose, and got really, really dark. And, there's a lot of that in the book, but ultimately it came down to one of my friend's funerals when I was 27. I went, and seeing the pain on his family's face and seeing his girlfriend, and just, I went high because I didn't want to feel anything, but it was like the universe reached down and ripped all of those numbing agents away, and they made me feel everything. So on the way home, I was calling around. Nobody knew about rehab. We didn't know anything. We didn't talk about AA in my community, nothing back in the early 2000s. And I called a rehab. They could get me in on a Wednesday. It was like Monday night. And by this time I'm shooting coke, heroin, meth, drinking, taking pills, whatever I can do to not feel. And, I owned a concrete company at the time, and I went down to my shop, and I knew that if I didn't get high again, that I wouldn't make it to rehab, because I'd get sick the next day and I'd be out running and gunning again. So I went down to my shop and shot up one more time, and I ended up having a seizure, hitting my head on the concrete, and flatlining. And the guy I was with bailed, called 911 anonymously as he was leaving, and they had to come in and work on me for like 20 minutes to get my heart going again. Rushed me to the hospital, where they found out I had a brain hemorrhage, and I needed to go to the U. So on the way up, I flatlined 3 more times. I was in a coma for 10 days, and woke up out of that. And you can get so sick mentally from that stuff that really laying there, having all those things happen, all I could think about was getting high. And it's like, at this point, obviously my family was really scared. I got out, and I went to rehab for the first time. And that was the first time that I've been around a group of men and women where I could talk about my feelings and there was a solution. And so as I came out, I was on fire. I went back to church, met my now ex-wife, but ended up getting married in the temple, and my concrete company was thriving and all of these things. And I ended up, you do all the work for making amends and making your life right. But the one thing I forgot about was my relationship with pain, physical pain. And I blew my ACL playing soccer. And as soon as I came out of surgery, I remember that day. I'd been clean for 18 months. And the second that nerve block wore off, it was over. It was like I had a needle in my arm within 2 hours. And now I just let the Lord down, lying to my wife, letting my family down. So that shame, it just came back so hard that it's like, do I want to let them down, or should I just, I'm going to get sober and nobody needs to know. And that transition ended up getting, my wife told me she was pregnant. And so I'm really trying to hide it. And, I held on long enough for my daughter to be born, and the marriage lasted maybe 6 or 7 more months. Got to a point where, my life had become very unmanageable. I wasn't safe around myself or around anybody else. And so my wife took my daughter and left, which I'm grateful for today, in hindsight, understanding that I think if they would have stayed, I might have had just enough cushion that I wouldn't have made it. And, ended up back on my parents' couch, and my dad came down one morning and he was just crying, and he sat across from me and he passed me a note and he said, "Read it." And sat up and started reading. He had sat up the night before and he wrote my obituary. And he said, "I know you're going to die, but you can't do it in my basement. You got to go." And that was like the last bit of any support I had. So I ended up living in my car downtown Salt Lake, homeless. And at any point, I want to say that I could have waved the white flag, but I don't know how you can be that low and still have ego. But I did. I was too proud to ask for help, too scared. I was a tough guy, you know. And finally, I came back, and the only way I could see my daughter was if my parents were there. I had to have supervision. And the only way I could get back in their house is if it was to see my daughter. So I made the deal. She deserved better. And so for me, that meant taking my life. And I went up to my parents' house and went in and hugged my mom and hugged my dad and kissed my daughter. And at the end of it, I told them I need to go to the bathroom. I went in and I stole a gun, and I went up above the Bountiful Temple. And I don't know if anybody's ever been up there, but there's a trail you can go up, and there's benches, and it sits right across from Moroni. And I just remember hitting my knees and putting that gun in my mouth and getting ready to pull the trigger. And I had like these flashes, visions of my mom and my daughter. And one of the tools they gave us in rehab was do a pros and cons list. And I'm like, all right, my daughter will never know me. I'll never embarrass her. I'll never let her down. Any man could come into her life and do a better job than me. So that was good. And then my mom, she's a God-loving woman. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pray to her God. He's never answered a single prayer from me. So when I pray and he doesn't answer it, then when she dies, she can go look him in the face and say, you failed me. And at this point, I'm super angry. If there's a God, I hate him. And so I knelt down and I said a prayer. And I said, I don't know anything about a still small voice. I'm going to need something a little bit louder than that. And if I don't get it by the time I open my eyes, I'm pulling this trigger. And that was August 31st, 2009. And as I went to open my eyes and I started pulling the trigger, a firework display went off above the Bountiful Temple. And I'm like, is this the sign? And shortly after that, I heard a voice and it said, is that loud enough?
Whoa.
And I didn't dare look behind me. I didn't know if it was in my head. I didn't know what was going on. I just basically was paralyzed, bawling my eyes out, face down in the dirt. And it took me about 25 minutes to get up. And I drove back down to my parents' house, gave my dad the gun, told him what had happened, and I drove myself straight to LDS hospital and checked into the psych ward and ended up going to rehab straight out of there. And that was the start of my recovery. So that was September 1st, 2009. And I got out, 60-day rehab. My wife's coming, she's bringing my daughter to family group, and life's going good. I thrive in those environments. Like I would have killed it in the military. I'm a leader. I'm all of these things. People listen to me when I talk, and now I'm like really feeling good. And 60 days is up. My wife comes and gets me, and we drive home. And in my head, like we were good. We're getting back together. And I got out, and she let me know that we're divorced. And so I made a deal with myself that if my life ever got bad enough again, that I would just end my life instead of getting back on drugs, because at least I could die sober. And the only person I told like two people. My brother was one of them, and he's like, man, let's get out of here. Let me take you to Jackson Hole. So he comes and picks me up, and we take off to Jackson Hole. And shortly thereafter, my buddy calls. He's like, what happened to your truck? I'm like, what do you mean? Nothing happened to my truck. He's like, it's on a flatbed going down Fifth South. I'm like, no, it's not. And when my dad said he was done before and that you can't do that, he also meant financially. So while I was in rehab, I didn't know that if you don't pay your bills, the bank comes and takes things. So they came, took my home, took my cars, took everything. So these are like in the first couple of weeks of getting out of rehab. I'm like, I thought life was supposed to be better. What's going on here? And at 9 months, my dad passed away. And it was the hardest point. And I don't know if you guys know who Eric Thomas is, the hip hop preacher. Yeah. So I actually met him in a hallway in San Diego, and I was kind of talking to him about my story. And he's like, look, dude, God gave you a chance. He took your wife. He's like, is that enough? And you couldn't humble up. So then he took all your shiny stuff, and he's like, hey, do you hear me yet? You didn't hear him. And then I said, I needed the pretty woman to make me feel good. I needed the cars and cool house to make me look good. And I needed my dad to pay for all that stuff when I couldn't. And he took that. And that was really the first time that I was forced to step up and accept the consequences of my actions. So I really started thinking more, and I couldn't afford a therapist at the time. So I got a Pell Grant from the government, and I went back to school, and I only studied psychology. And the counselor's like, you got to test into math and English. I'm like, nah,
nope,
that's not why I'm
good.
here.
I'm good. I know.
That's not why I'm here. And they're like, well, what are you doing? I'm like, I just want to know why I'm so messed up. And sitting in that class, I could retain like 98% of what was in that book because I felt like it was my life story. For the first time, they told me I had ADHD. I'd never looked that up. They told me I had anxiety. I didn't know what that was. I knew what it felt like, but then they said I was bipolar and all these different things. And I started studying it and seeing the side effects of my actions and what I put into my body. And the only two things I was ever good at was athletics and now psychology. So that was when I got this passion to go and help other people through fitness. And I started training people for free at the park. And that turned into, I'm a little bit of an extremist in the sense of the way I learn things. So I'm sitting there at 35 years old on my mom's couch, and I was on Facebook, and there was a fight promoter, and he's like, somebody just fell out of a fight. I need a fighter at 155. So I ran into my mom's room and I hopped on the scale. It was like 154. I texted him back. I'm like, I'll fight. I was still pretty angry. I was a tough guy on the streets, and he asked me if I was a wrestler, and I was like, yeah, I wrestled 7th grade at Mill Creek Junior High, bro. Killed it. And he tells me that he's a Nebraska wrestler. And again, my ego was just blaring. I was like, I'm good, dude. And
big 12 nothing. Big 10 nothing.
He trained with Jordan Burroughs. It's like, who's that? And I remember going in there. I was so confident, not the walkout, but just in general, like, I'm going to beat this kid up and I'm not going to get in trouble for it. And we went out there, and he mounted me and smashed my face for 2.5 rounds and finally choked me out. And I remember feeling that fear and shame, and like I let the world down, and that everybody hated me. As I'm watching this kid, I had so many friends and family there to support me. And when you go out, you got to go see the doctor and then take the walk of shame to the locker room, is what I felt like. And as I'm walking by it, everybody's like, that was awesome. You did so good. And I'm like, nah, it was the other dude that won. They're like, no, I would never dare get in there. And every table was like, that was amazing. And I'm thinking, the only person in here talking trash about me is me. And unfortunately, at 35 is when I started learning self-love. I gave it to everybody else. I put everybody else first. I wanted to be seen, but I wasn't taking care of myself that way. And that moment really changed my life. And so I went and started training with that kid's camp. And early on, I was like, I'm going to become this weapon. I'm going to be able to beat people up. I'm still got the little bullied kid inside of this grown man. And what I found was discipline, honor, respect. It's like the more I learned, the less angry I was, the more I could operate out of confidence rather than fear. And that took me on a journey to basically where we are now, of helping people learn life lessons in a safe environment, being fitness, rock climbing, skydiving, whatever it is. Because I think it's super important that I didn't want to die with my story. I knew I was quickly finding out that when we were younger, we were told men don't cry, men don't share their feelings, suck it up, get to work, all these things. And the more I was vulnerable and the more I shared, the more real people I had around me.
That's facts.
And I'm like, dude, I felt lied to. I felt all these things. So just kept doing that. And it grew to a point where at this point, my mom didn't trust me that much. So we were training year round outside. Like I was snow blowing the grass. So we had an area to work out. And people are like, hey, we love your workouts, but we're not as hardcore as you. Like if you had a facility. So I talked my mom into letting me put some rubber horse stall mats in one of her rooms in the basement. And that's where Eastman Fitness originated. And then I was like transitioning guys out of prison and all these things. And I remember walking through my mom's kitchen one day with these 2 gang members that just got out of prison. And in my head, it's Eastman Fitness. And I see her making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I looked at them fully covered in tattoos. And I was like, I can't be doing this. Like the fear of finances and all that stuff. And so finally I went and I got a facility that was in Bountiful. And that started the journey of getting into the schools, working with youth, working with families. And the more I found that I would study PTSD, if I felt anything in me, I'd go and study my story. And I found that everybody struggles with something. There's some that are willing to talk about it and some that are going to crash and burn later in life. And it just got to a point where I knew that I would do this for the rest of my life, whether I was homeless or a billionaire. I would be out helping my community.
Rob, first off, thank you for sharing that. That is meaningful and impactful. Man, when I'm thinking about this and you're telling me the story, like I keep thinking like, right, because when the crap happens, there's always like a ground zero.
Yeah.
Right. Like we just hit ground zero. In my mind, I'm thinking, this is ground zero. And then you keep going. I'm like, oh no, like, this is ground zero, right? But it's not necessarily the ground zeros. It's the cyclic nature of having to learn the lesson, right? You maybe learn one lesson, but now you got to go figure out how to do this part of the lesson and go do that part of the lesson. And I appreciate your journey, and I see you, and I validate that because that's a heck of a journey. And we are so glad that the journey continues and that the rest of the story is incredibly unwritten.
Yeah.
So, man, so fitness is part of the game.
Yeah.
That you do now. You do a lot with youth. What other ventures are you in right now?
Yeah. So at the time back, it was 11 years ago, I gotten married and she had a son, and I'm cage fighting at the time, and he's playing doubleheader baseball games and not getting up, and not like he's sitting on the bench. And I'm just like, bro, I don't care what you do. I will coach it. I will do whatever, but we got to change sports. Like I can't do this. I'm over there doing burpees on the sideline, prepping for fights and all this. So he chose wrestling. And like I said, I'd never wrestled except for 7th grade. And I went and I volunteered, and I walked in the first day and the coach is like, you can't be in here. I'm like, I'm volunteering my time. He's like, no, you need to go get a background check and let me know when that's done. So I was like, I'm like 4 years sober at the time. And so I go in, I'm pumped, and fingerprints and that. And they're like, okay, you'll know in the next 2 weeks. And I got an email the next day. It's like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. And it had enclosed my history of arrests. And like, I never got convicted of anything, but there was a lot of arrests. And in that moment, I went from being on cloud 9 to being that little bullied, judged kid again. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? I am not going to do this. So I set an appointment with the guy that said no, and he didn't know who it was. And I went in and I slapped the paper on his desk. I said, where would you like to start? And his eyes get big. And I basically went through all of them, shared the story that I just shared with you. And he was crying by the end. He said, you know what? We need more coaches like you. And he stamped it approved. And the very next year, I got a head coaching job. And I spent the last decade coaching wrestling and volleyball. And they ended up giving me a classroom to work with some of the troubled youth, where they call it a tracker, where you're supposed to help them with their schoolwork and things like that. And instead, we wrote positive raps about their moms or about their situations. I taught them how to play chess. Because what do kids do? They react. What does chess teach you to do? Think 5 moves down the road. So I was just incorporating these different styles of learning, if you will. And it took off, and found myself doing, interventions. I work with the military, police departments on how to handle mental health calls. My dad was a politician. He was the majority whip in the state Senate. So I spent a lot of time understanding how politics work. And I know that if we don't get to the top of the communities and pull some blinders off, that my work would be for nothing. So as I did that, I transitioned from adults. Then I wanted to do kids, but then I found I'd work with these kids and they'd be doing amazing. And then I'd see them after the summer and they were the same kid as before. I'm like,
Yeah.
they went back into the same environment and they didn't have the tools because the parents or whoever they were living with just beat it out of them. And then that's when I came up with the idea, like, I got to work with everybody in the family. So I've got a company called The Village Effect.
Okay.
And it's something that where if I'm in a life coach or I'm working with mental health, if parents aren't on board or husband or wife isn't on board, depending on if it's an adult or a kid, then I'm going to wait until they are. You know, I don't want to give this kid all these tools and just watch him see his household go to hell. So it's super passionate in this area that worst case scenario, they could never look me in the eye and say, well, I didn't know. So big on educating our community, teachers, the admin, you know, I'll go and speak. I spoke a ton in schools and the kids loved it and they would send me messages on Instagram for years, but that was kind of the end. I'm like, how can I have a bigger impact? So we'd also I'd speak and then they'd go into breakout sessions with some life coaches and therapists and they would learn emotional vocabulary where they could actually describe what they were feeling, not just mad, angry, sad, like there's deeper. Why did it cause it? And then we'd work with the teachers as well to show them early signs of these things so that if they're a math teacher, they don't have to be dealing with an anxiety attack because they saw the girl or boy struggling a week ago and they got them the resources they needed. We wait too long for a crisis to happen. And at that point, a lot of times it's too late. The kid, the mom, the dad commit suicide and there's nothing we can do. Pick up the pieces. The ripple effect of that in the community, inside the family and in the community is immeasurable.
It absolutely.
So if we don't get to a place as a community where I've been doing this a long time, this is 14 years that I've been coaching in the mental health industry. And I've learned one thing, everybody, every family has some secrets and could use some help.
Absolutely.
So I'm just trying to get to the point where everybody, like if you break your arm, you get a cast and you go to school and you have everybody sign it. But if you're depressed, you keep it to yourself and you tell nobody. It's like, we've got to flip the script on that. We've got to get that to be an easy conversation and not like, oh, we don't talk about that. It's like, get rid of the shame, get rid of the judgment, all of that. And let's just come together as a community where we can see people struggling. We have the resources. We know the people. We know where to go so that it never gets to that point. You know, we can't extinguish it for all the way, but we can definitely put a dent in it. And we can start teaching the community leaders and anybody else who wants to get involved how to make a change.
I love this, man. And let's chat about this book. I saw that you're going to do an Audible version of this, which is super exciting. How did this come about? What was kind of the breaking point in the process of that?
Yeah, so probably a year into speaking, everybody, the parents, the teachers, whoever, the kids are like, "Do you have a book?" And the second somebody said, "Did you write?" And that was like academic. I was just going to that dumb little kid. I'm like, "No, I don't write, and I'm not going to write." And so I put it off for a decade. And then after my dad died, and we're sitting, you know, a decade removed, I'm like, I don't have any writing from him. We kept his phone off for like 2 years because we didn't have his voice other than on his voicemail. And it's like, how many things did he have that he could have shared with us? How many tools could he have shared if he had something like this? So rather than writing a book, I started a podcast. I'm like, hey, I can talk. Like my daughter can hear what I'm about, what I stand for, that I'm trying to make a change. And then I got to the point where it's like, I have worked insane amount of hours, paid and free, dealing with more suicides a year than anybody should ever have to.
Yeah.
I've got all these tools. It's like, if I don't write my story, if I don't put out some tools, it was all for nothing. And so at that point, I called around and found an amazing ghostwriter and went and shared my story. And we were locked up in a cabin for 7 days doing dictation and then worked for 2 years weekly, Thursday morning Zoom calls and adjusting chapters. And it made it come to life. And I think the book alone, not halfway through, towards the end, I read a chapter of my own story and I was like, got into that judgment and fear. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to put this out to people. Like, they're going to judge me.
Scary.
And it's like, that's the point, And she's like, I said, you know what? Let's just finish out, maybe do another chapter and then I'm going to print one for me. I'm going to give one to my daughter and that's good. She said, no, this isn't your story anymore. It's like, people need to hear this. And, that's when I was really started to look at it and look at the data of my life. And the more vulnerable I was, the more everybody was vulnerable. It's like, we all share a story. We've all been there. So the only thing us as humans share is struggle. We can't agree on the same team, food, color, nothing. So why is it the hardest conversation? So I was like, you know what? Here we go. It's all out there. You want to talk trash? It's in chapter 17. you're late. You must have read my book. So it's very vulnerable and there's not much that's not covered in there. Mental health, sexual abuse, lying, cheating, divorce, religion, politics. But I did write it so that a 10-year-old could read every single word. Because when I'm reading a book and I don't know the word, the book's going to get put down. Yeah. And I tried to write it where it's just a real life story. And I think it's appropriate for a mature 12-year-old and up. So it's just the start of, I think, a long line of different things for me. And I'll tell you what, writing that book was more therapeutic for me and my family, and like interviewing my ex-wives and letting them tell their story without me trying to defend myself. It's like I wrote it kind of to where there's my truth, there's your truth, and there's what really happened. And the more I peeled back those layers, I was like, man, you could ask 5 people that were in the same situation and we have 5 different stories.
Absolutely.
So I put in the front, I'm like, hey, don't take offense to any of this because that's what it is. It's my story.
I love it. And I'm so excited for this. I just can't wait. Let's talk about your family now.
Yeah.
You have a blended family. How many kids?
Yeah. So we have 4 kids, 3 boys and a daughter.
I love it. I love it.
It's I had given up on love. I thought it was a myth. I thought, I tried so hard. I'd done the work and just could not really find something that felt right until I met my wife, Heidi. And
how'd you meet her?
I saw her at a wrestling tournament and I was like, man, I'm going to go talk to that lady. And, but I was getting called down to the mat and I went down to the mat and I came back and it was a day-long tournament at the Farmington Legacy Event Center and I couldn't find her. And I was like, if it's meant to be. And then I start walking up the stairs and there she is with my now son, Caden, and my mother and father-in-law. But I'm like, I can't just walk up and creep on this lady right in front of everybody. So I went outside and I was like, man, if this is meant to be, make it happen. And shortly after I was on online dating and I saw a picture that looked familiar and we started talking and we couldn't figure out how we'd seen each other or we both thought we looked familiar. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to be late for wrestling. And she's like, oh, my boy wrestles. And I had her send me a picture and it was of her and him that day. And I was like, you are not going to believe this. And it may sound creepy, but I felt something and,
I spied you before, girl.
Yeah. And then we just started talking and we had so many things in common and, that I don't think we've spent a day apart since. And she's super passionate about mental health and structure and she's amazing and she's done the work and she loves me. And it's just, when you have somebody on your side that I can tell anything to, there's no judgment, there's solutions, there's love and compassion. And I think I was just prepped through all of working with the youth and seeing all these things to be put into that blended family and love my boys like my own and my daughter. And I love it. I can't say enough about it. The good, the bad, the ugly is all in love. And again, I didn't know that was a real thing. And she is amazing and gives that to me and allows me to grow and holds me accountable and all the things that I needed to thrive in a relationship.
And as a man, like that's really what we need is just to be loved.
Yeah.
Just to be loved unconditionally because, we had any tough guy is just this is a kid in a sandblock, playing around building something silly that he just wants to know that it looks good and it's appreciated and all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's big. Like one of the first things I told her, I said, look, in a relationship, I need a place where I can take off my armor. Yeah. And then as I go through all these leadership things, it's like, don't ever put your armor on. And it's like, so she allows me to be what I need to be. If I need to cry, I cry, and then we move forward and see what the problem was and move forward. And I hate the word safe space, but it's like she makes everything. She makes it very easy for a tough guy to be vulnerable and to just be me.
That's it. And she's got a book coming out.
She does. She is amazing. I got to ask, can I share a little bit about so her late husband struggled with PTSD and ended up committing suicide. And the way she's been through that and her boys have been through that. And for us to connect, it was like, I can't think of a better couple that has exactly what each other needs in that setting to be able to thrive and has been through it. And a woman who's been through what she's been through and still is so loving and compassionate and not jaded and all of that. It's just like, man. So she's a real estate guru and amazing with financial stuff. And so she's writing a book called Buying Time. And I think it started out a little different for her at the start as like a how-to book, but now understanding that because she did what she did in business, bought her time to heal from these things and get back to who she needed to be and be a good mother and all of those things. So I won't get too much into that, but she's way smarter than me, way prettier. And I'm
well,
just
that's the easy part, right?
Right?
They're always prettier than we are.
Right. And so, yeah, I just, to not be needed and be appreciated in the same deal is pretty awesome.
It is awesome. Now, so I like to share a quote with you. And I think based off of the title, Warrior in the Garden, you know where my quote's going to go. But it's just an old Buddhist quote. It says, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. What is your impression when I share that quote with you?
So that is actually one of my favorite quotes. And the start of that says, the student asked the master, you teach me to fight, but you talk about peace. How do you reconcile the two? And then the master says, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And that's exactly what this book is. I wish, we need to prepare our community, our family, our kids for what may happen. Hopefully they don't need it, but if they do, they have it. We go through life protecting, buying our kids things, making them think life is great. And then they go out and get the job for $8 an hour when they're living on an $8,000 a month little booze fest. And it's not fair to them. Of course, we want to give them a good life. Of course, we want to have them live better than we did. But that's not giving it to them. It's teaching them how to do it for themselves. It's giving them the skills necessary to be the warrior in the garden. It's like kids react out of fear, wanting to fit in, whatever. That's when bad things happen. Yeah. But if kids are educated and it does not take their innocence away like people think it does, tell them, look, if you do this, this could happen. So make sure you're thinking about that before you do that. And I think education, and we're in a society where we overprotect and underprepare. Yeah, and absolutely. I think that needs to be swapped. And we need to give kids are so resilient. They're so much stronger than we are. It's like, for instance, my little boy, he's 9. His name's Miles. And he's a sweetheart. Just a tender, never a bully could beat him up and somebody go after the bully and he'd stand up for the bully. He's just a lover, man. And we were sitting there in summer and he was sitting on the couch. There's not many friends around. And I'm like, dude, you got until 2:00 to pick something. I don't care if it's gymnastics, basketball, I don't care. And I came back out. He was still there. I was like, all right, looks like it's jujitsu. So I looked up, there was only one place open. We just drove over there, and it ended up being a guy that I met at a wrestling tournament. He owns it. And I'm like, look, dude, you don't get to quit, give it at least 30 days. And then at the end of that, we'll have a conversation. And what that has done for him to be able to be coached, us not like, my wife has a hard time. She's like, I want to watch. Like, no, like let him develop these relationships with these other people so that he's excited to come home and tell us about what he learned. And just yesterday, 2 days ago, the doorbell rings. Miles lets his friend in. Doorbell rings. Friend. Doorbell. Friend. Doorbell. We're like, dude, you spent the whole summer with no friends, and now you have 5 over on a Tuesday. Like, what's going on here, dude? And he's confident. He can explain his emotions better than I can explain mine. He's crazy intelligent. Like, he's being given the tools. He's having to earn those tools. And by getting armbarred and choked out in a friendly environment, he's learning more about himself. It's just mirror work. And I couldn't do that for him. His mom couldn't do that for him. It's like coaching other kids. You understand this. Like, you give them something that other people can't give. And in psychology, they say at the age of 10, parenting, your ability to influence your child ends, and friends,
sure does.
Church leaders, and coaches take over.
Yeah.
You can force it. You can, make your kids have a really tough time with that, or you can get them around the right people. So I feel like that's where parents try and wear all the hats and they suck at most of them. It's like, do what you do well, hire out the rest, get them into a club or a summer camp, or let them, if they want to do ballet instead of football, let them do it. Yeah. Like, let them crash and burn and sit with them in the pain and explain, like, what could you have done differently?
Absolutely.
You didn't fail. You didn't, so. Yeah.
And failure is just a wonderful leverage point, right? Like, and we always talk about, with my groups, talk about being uncomfortable, like being comfortable, being uncomfortable, seeking uncomfortability, like realizing that, like, it is a safe place to make mistakes, because these mistakes that we make aren't lasting. Yeah. Right. Making a mistake in a game or in a wrestling competition or in a jiu-jitsu fight, like, right. You just learn from that. That's not a final failure, right? Suicide is, right. And, and so teaching them how to fail and learning how to fail propels us into winning. Yeah. Well, let's switch gears up a little bit, go to the lightning round and get a little bit more, we'll get a little bit more, know more about Rob. What would your last meal be?
Oh, probably some Thai food.
Some Thai food. All right.
We've been getting pineapple curry lately, and I'm hungry right now for that as we talk about it. But
that sounds good.
I spent time in Israel for school and things like that. I've been all around the world, and some good authentic food anywhere is good.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, books or movies?
Definitely movies.
Okay, what's your favorite movie?
Man, I think like the Bravehearts, the Remember the Titans. I cry in all those movies. The Warrior, where the brothers end up fighting. Right. It's like any father-daughter or any like sports thing where there's some good lesson in it. I'm done. It's like Hallmark for my mom. Yeah. Like, give me the tissues.
It's like The Last Samurai, right? Or Gladiator, right?
Gladiator.
You're just losing it every time.
Yeah. Braveheart's one of my favorite, and William Wallace, we're a direct descendant of his, and that's me and my wife just got married in his memorial in Stirling, Scotland about 2 months ago.
Was that the picture that you sent me? Was that one?
Mm-hmm.
That is so freaking cool.
So any warrior style, like, get out there, learn, and pick your sword back up and keep going.
I love it. What's a bucket list vacation for you?
I'm kind of like the bucket list killer, because most people think my life is like a bucket list. But I think Europe, the UK, like I said, we were just there. I love that culture, the pace. I think Scotland or Switzerland, they're probably my 2 favorite places, just to go and be able to take a month and get like into the community. Mm-hmm. I don't like bouncing around. I like sitting and like meeting people and meeting them again and just really learning about that person or that community. I just love, and that's why I'm here in Herriman. I reached out on Herriman Happenings so that I want to be in my community. I want to know my neighbor. I want to, I'm not the most approachable, visually looking guy, but I'm very approachable. Like, I care about people I don't even know.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know you and I love you.
It's definitely is that you are that. Now you've accomplished a lot. You've been through a lot. What is something that's left? What is something that you want to accomplish between now and the grave?
Man, I want to leave. You know, I just opened. We're getting ready to open a gym here in West Jordan.
So exciting!
And I want to leave that legacy of changing communities. Life is hard enough. We don't need to make it harder on each other. Like, nature is great at that. And the universe will reteach you the same lesson time and time again if you don't get it right the first time.
Very
so
cyclic.
We go out there and bash each other or judge each other. I want to change the game. I want to change the game, and that's my mission. And I don't want anybody to feel like I felt.
I love it. So this next question, we've already talked about a lot of these, but I love this question. It's, what is your favorite failure? You know, because failure is never really a failure unless we're done.
Yeah.
Right. So what is the thing? And I know we've talked about a lot, and it's probably hard to pinpoint one, but what is the thing that's propelled you the most to be who you are today?
And I think the ability to shed my skin, as far as like what I thought I was, what I thought was true, and seeing it for what it is and moving on and knowing that I will never arrive. There's no point where I made it to the top of the mountain. If I ever feel like I've made it, that's God's way of saying, hey, take your shoes off, rub your feet. It's a false summit. 'Cause there's the next one. So I enjoy the journey. You know, I used to put so much on things and name tags and all these different things that it's just like, I just want to be unseen and seen. And I think the failure for me before was trying so hard to convince people of something rather than just being me and allowing my tribe to come.
Love it. What's the best piece of advice you ever got?
To thine own self be true.
What's the worst piece of advice you ever got?
You're amazing. Just the way you are.
I love it. I love it. Okay, last question. Right, this is the mental health. It's a crisis, especially among our youth, among us as men. It is absolutely epidemic, critical. What do we need to do as a community, as a city, as culture, as men, as humans? How do we link arms and really take the next step forward into banishing this epidemic?
Yeah, I think like we talked about earlier a little bit was the way our parents were raised. The man's job was mailbox out, be tough. You could be sick at home or be sick at work. You better be sick at work and don't show your emotions. It's like if the fathers teach the boys how to respect themselves, respect women, love themselves, all that stuff, and take that aggressive nonsense out of it and let them know it's okay to not be okay. We can't stop there. You've got to do something about it. Like, we need to expose the problem, but then you've got to do something to deal with the problem. We can't wear it like a badge of honor. Like, I have this, so I don't have to participate. It's like, no, we got to get out. We got to make some changes. Yeah. It's like, I'm depressed. Okay, you have clinical depression. Okay, well, and then you just sign off on that. Like, don't be your diagnosis. Not saying that I'm not a doctor, but I'm saying there's ways, there's growth, there's share your story. You're not alone. And if the men do it, and I think there's a lot of women, I think a lot of people just in general is we want to look good for our neighbors. We want to drive expensive stuff. We want to do all of these things when we could put that energy into just that community. Let's have block parties. Let's get to actually know each other. And if your kid's doing something wrong, I'm cool with the neighbors, telling them their side of the story and letting them say, hey, I did that too. And this is what happened. Absolutely. People are too afraid to share and in fear of judgment. I work with all ages, and whether it's an 80-year-old, a 60-year-old, a 20-year-old, I'm always working with the inner child. When we dig back the layers, if they got divorced and it's a talent they learned when they were 7 to fit in on the playground. It's no longer working. We've got to get to the point where you look at yourself in the mirror and you're willing to change. We can't change anybody else, but we can change us. Because your dad told you this was true doesn't make it true. Like, we've got to change the way that we treat each other and the way we communicate in our communities.
Man, Rob, this is so awesome. So where's the best place for everybody to go pick up this book?
So it is on Amazon, and there's the ebook, there's the paperback, there's a hardback. If you want a signed copy, you can reach out to me on social media.
What is that? What is that handle?
Tattooed Life Coach and the number 8, or Rob Eastman on Facebook.
Okay.
So I have some books. Like, I'm doing an event, mental health night at MMA fights, a bunch of tough guys. Like, everybody is sick, and the more we can talk about it and do that. So I'm going to do a book signing in Salt Lake on the 9th. But I'm not saying it because it's my book. I've had, the former governor read the book. I've had a 10-year-old read the book, and I've had different cultures read the book, and everybody feels like it's their story, whether they went through it or their brother went through it, or everybody's attached in some way to something. And if not, hopefully you learn some tools through that you can pass on.
So if you don't get the book, start with the follow on Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah.
But I am pumped to learn more, right? At Voices of Herriman, right? Our goal is to give voices to the people that have the amazing stories to share. So we're going to give you the floor to share your voice with the people of Herriman.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you guys. I posted one time on Herriman Happenings, and it's like 500 likes and a couple hundred comments and people being real, sending me DMs. I spent 45 years in my community, and I got more response from you guys in one post than I have in the 45 years of being somewhere else. So thank you guys for making me feel seen and that what I'm doing matters. And like I said before, I love you and I don't even know you. So if you see me out, introduce yourself. I'm not as scary as I look, I promise. And neither is my dog. I've got a big cane corso. He's a sweetheart. My wife's amazing, but I really, truly want to be involved in making Herriman a happier place. Not that it's unhappy, but our world just needs to get back to connection. Humans crave connection, and we're losing that on phones and the internet and everything else. So reach out if you need anything. I answer every email, voicemail, text, DMs, whatever. So I want to be approachable and share what I've learned along the way.
And I'm so glad you're here. I can't wait to see all the fun things that we're going to be able to do. Just planning the future. It's going to be a blast. Herriman, we talk a lot about, the phrase, we got you, right? That's our sign off phrase. And we're going to sign off with that in just a minute. But this is why we do what we do here, is because we all fight these battles, right? And we don't know who's fighting what battle. Mental health is something that's near and dear to my heart, something that I've struggled with. And I'm appreciative of people that are bold enough to share those things. But understand this, guys, when we sign off here, when we say we got you, we mean that, right? And Rob and myself and DC and Big and everybody else who's been a part of this project, this is the reason we do it, is for you, to give you an opportunity to be protected, to be loved, to be seen. So with that, you ready, my friend?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Herriman, we got you. Thank you so much for being a part of the Voices of Herriman podcast. I hope you've been inspired, moved, and have connected with the stories and the passion shared by our community. As I wrap up this episode, remember, the journey does not end here. Keep exploring, keep sharing, and keep connecting. Together, we can create a vibrant, supportive, and thriving community. If you have a story to share, a suggestion for future episodes, or just want to say, hey, I'd love to hear from you, reach out on social media at Voices of Herriman and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Before we go, a heartfelt thank you to Mix@6 Studios for producing and editing our podcast. Head over to mixat6studios.com to learn more about all the amazing services they offer. To the amazing individuals who have shared with me their stories and our fantastic listeners, you make Voices of Herriman a meaningful experience. Until next time, take care, stay connected, and remember, I got you.